Hello. Godzilla has taken many forms since first destroying parts of Tokyo in 1954. There have been an enormous number of sequels and remakes, reboots, spin offs, adaptations, TV shows, comic books, and much, much more. But there has never been a role playing game. At least until now. Thanks to the recent launch on Kickstarter of Godzilla the role playing game, you can now fight Kaiju and save the day in the IDW Comics universe of Godzilla. IDW have brought together a trio of veteran Games Workshop designers in order to create this brand new game. Gav Thorpe, Jervis Johnson, and Mark Latham. And I was very lucky to get the chance to talk to Mark and Gav about their work on the game and what they love about telling stories in this Godzilla universe. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today I'm in conversation about Godzilla the role-playing game. Gav, Mark, thank you both for joining me so much. We're going to be chatting about the Godzilla RPG, the role-playing game, and sort of exploring how you've developed it and brought it all together and what you can do with it. I suppose the first thing to get into, I guess, it would be like, what were your roles in the creation of the game? So, I mean, Gav, let's start with you. What were you doing to help create this RPG?
A bit of everything, really. So I was approached by IDW, or one of the senior managers at IDW, about a year ago, just over a year ago, and who proposed that they were setting up a new games division and wanted to lead with a Godzilla role-playing game. And I knew that I couldn't do that on my own. So I hit up Jervis and Mark basically for like, guys, do you want to do a role-playing game? And so in some respects, kind of like that, that's been part of my role, is like working. I've picked up a bit of the kind of, not literally project management, but some of that side of stuff. But in terms of the games itself, I've been sharing duties really. We've both, we've all been working on rules. Jervis has been like the main rules lead. He's the actual real system designer, and then I've been focused on the starter set and the starter adventure. Most of my main duty, and then we've been developing the character classes, and we have the big bad guys in this called antagonists. So we've with the Kaiju essentially. So again, Mark and I divided our duties on basically the character classes and the Kaiju between us in terms of coming up with the stats and things like that, while Jervis was finishing off the rules. And then there's a few appendices and games master advice, and then there's the background section about, because this is set, the main drive for it is the new Kaisei era setting that IDW have, which is a particular kind of Godzilla setting and series of comics. So I was writing the background section essentially for that. So yeah, that's mostly more on the narrative side of stuff, I guess, rather than the crunchy rules thing, which was more Jervis's domain,
Right.
For me.
Right. And what have you been leading on, Mark? What's been your sort of main part of the project?
Yeah, so I think I'm probably even less crunchy than Gav. So I'm much more of a narrative guy. We did share the kind of character classes and all that kind of stuff in the antagonists, but I've mainly been working on the very long core book adventure, like a multi-session, multi-part adventure, mini campaign, really.
Right.
So that's only just gone off. So yeah, I think that's been keeping me very busy. But yeah, I think that the start of things, because Gav was like the Hannibal trying to get the A-team together, and he got stuck with me, unfortunately. So I'll be Murdoch. So yeah, I think we started off kind of getting involved, doing a bit of everything, but then our roles kind of settled down as we went along, and the core roles became a bit more defined, and Jervis went away and did Jervis magic on those. Then we all got stuck on our roles. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so. Yeah, I mean, it was a quite deliberate choice. Like, obviously, Jervis is very good at rule systems and things like that. Mm-hmm. Mark's had much more experience. Well, this is the first role-playing game Jervis and I have worked on, whereas Mark's had more experience working with role-playing games, particularly in more recent years. And full disclosure, Mark is actually running a role-playing campaign that I've been part of on and off for a couple of decades now.
Yeah.
So again,
Wow.
his DM experience and stuff.
Oh, amazing. What game is that? If we
Also
could
tap. Well, all
go on a
kinds of things really, but currently we're using Black Sword Hack. That's right, isn't it? Black Sword Hack to do fantasy adventures set in Titan, the world of fighting fantasy.
Oh, amazing. That's cool.
because Mark can't do anything out of a book, apparently.
No, so that's the weird thing. Actually, working on a published game is so weird for me because I'm one of those forever DMs who just makes stuff up all the time. So like, I don't really care if a rule set is complete or even good. So I just make up my own rules anyway. So it really focuses the mind getting stuff published.
Yeah, it's interesting, I guess, because your homebrew is actually the official material in a way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
It's all this in my head.
That's great.
Yeah,
And then,
yeah. I mean, generally, we are. That is the kind of experience we're trying to draw on. And it's quite a big difference working on role-playing games to miniatures games in many respects because of that. Because there is a DM and players who are going to give it a little bit of latitude, but we didn't want to rely on that necessarily. But also, we've got between the three of us, that's probably Jervis quite often likes regaling us the fact that he's an original D&D player. You've got the stuff like that. So there's 100 years experience of role playing games between us.
right.
I think, and not all of it on Jeff. But play, and what we wanted to put that in. We did look at this game and think, being able to design it from scratch and say, as a player, as a DM, as a starter set and a core book, what do we want in there? What do we need in there? And as a system, and try to address everything. If we've got this one chance to create a game, what are we going to do with it, and how are we going to make sure it does all the things we want the game to do?
Sure, yeah. And so, what is I guess, the sales pitch or the 15-minute elevator pitch of this as a game? You're tackling Godzilla, a specific version of Godzilla from the IDW comics. But what's the intention? What are you trying to achieve with it?
At its core, it's kind of a super team up game, really, actually, because the focus is on G-Force. You're members of, or sort of like contractors of, contractees of G-Force, and their role is essentially to defend human civilization from the Kaiju. And G-Force USA in particular to want to kill Godzilla and to destroy the Kaiju. That's not necessarily an opinion that's shared across the world, but that's very much the G-Force USA thing. So the player characters are members of G-Force, from soldiers to scientists to that kind of thing. And the emphasis is there's a Kaiju threat, which may or may not be evident right at the start of the adventure, but there will be a Kaiju turning up at some point because you're playing Godzilla, the role-playing game, and they're very hard to take head on. So there's essentially building up your allies and your resources to be able to combat the big bad when it turns up, or try to work out what it's trying to do. Because again, a lot of the time it's not necessarily about just rocking up and trying to fight it in battle. It's about trying to redirect it or address its needs or whatever. Very much the direction from Toho is Kaiju are this natural disaster, basically. It's like you can't necessarily defeat them. You can only survive them and hopefully mitigate them. And that's very much the idea of you've got this team of interesting, cool characters who can come together and fight a Kaiju, basically.
Right. Sure. I mean, that must make it. Mark, I'm imagining from a narrative perspective and a adventure design perspective, that must make it really hard to create, because obviously you want that replayability in the game, yeah, but you don't always want to build to the same climax. So how are you tackling that? What tools are you sort of putting in and approaching that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, when we first got together, I think the Kaisei era comics hadn't even launched. So we naturally assumed you're going to be writing a game about people running away in terror from Godzilla. But now you're going to be playing the people protecting the people who are running away in terror from Godzilla. So essentially it comes down to antagonists, which are one of the biggest part of this game. And you have your Kaiju, and you have the immortal Kaiju, the famous ones that everyone knows. You have the lesser Kaiju, which you can create yourself using Gavin Jervis's handy Kaiju generator, which is pretty amazing. But then you also have the non-kaiju antagonists, and I think that's where the stories really lie. You
Right.
basically have organized crime gangs, you have corporate megacorps, like into biotech and stuff like that. You have rival militaries, you have international militaries, mercenary groups, and you have all these different factions who've all been shaped by the Kaisei universe. So essentially, they will trying to get something from kaiju or destroy kaiju or generally get in your way. So the main plot involves how you deal with those people, how you negotiate those threats, and then it's just like a very human level RPG. But there's going to be a kaiju storming through at some point. So it's kind of, have you succeeded in kind of defeating the main plot to give you the best possible chance of sorting out the kaiju threat, or have you not, which makes the kaiju threat much more difficult.
Right.
And that could be anything from kaiju spawn popping up all over the place to they've created mutants in their wake who are launching a massive attack, or extra kaiju have been attracted by your battles on the ground, and now there's 3 kaiju fighting over the city. It could be anything. So I think the variety of stories is there, but you have to focus on kind of the human level rather than focusing outwards towards kaiju.
Right.
Because they're just their own immutable thing.
Sure. Right. Yeah, because there's this like ticking clock mechanism, isn't there, within the game, right? Where it's always would that always build up to, okay, this is the rampage moment when the kaiju now bursts through a building and whatever you're doing is going to be affected by that, or can you use that ticking clock in other ways as well?
So yeah, the crisis clock was an early mechanic, and one of those that again, one of those things that we see in various games like Doomsday Clocks and stuff like that. We want to make it a central conceit of the game is that the world will continue without you. That whatever your players' actions are now doing and stuff, the world isn't waiting for you to walk through that particular door before this thing happens. It's like it will happen whether you're there or not. Particularly with because the adventures use a map. They use a hex map, and things will move around on that. Once you've got a kaiju, it's going to move around and smash things up and destroy the city and head for the power plant and do its thing. And it's not going to wait for you to encounter it before it does that. So we have the crisis clock, which essentially, so it's worth pointing out that everything's driven by, this is card-driven, playing card-driven, not dice-driven. So everything is all about, there's 2 decks. There's the crisis deck and the chance deck. So the crisis deck is essentially the DM's deck. And at the end of each turn, or in the crisis phase of each round, the DM flips a card and the score just gets added to the crisis clock. And the adventure itself will have predetermined events at certain numbers, and which we call flashpoints. So you have a minor crisis, which could be anything really. Sometimes it might be a rise in Kaisei levels, or some criminals are using, some mutant criminals are doing a bank heist, or whatever. It could be, it could be subplots. They can be, your commander is on the radio telling you to go somewhere. Any of those stuff. And then you have major crises, some of which may be kaiju appearing. A kaiju appearing would obviously be a major crisis, but they're not always that. Again, they're large events. The main thing about the major crisis is they reset the clock. Kind of. So there's some control in designing the adventure of like how variable the timing will be, but also it's like you've hit a big milestone, things happened, the clock resets, and now you're building towards the next milestone, but you don't necessarily know what they are. So again, it's up to there's a lever there for the DM to play with, either when they're designing the adventure, but also in play of like, it's like, well, you're up to 26 now, nothing's happened yet, or must be getting close maybe. So the players are feeling the pressure. Because one of the other things is that because it's kaiju, the scale is big. This is not a dungeon crawl. It's not quite hex crawl either, but it's kind of in between. You have a large hex map of several miles of city or outskirts of a city and a reservoir or whatever and you're moving across these, and rounds are between 5 and 15 minutes really, depending on what you're doing. So a player can do quite a bit, a character can do quite a bit, a group of characters do quite a bit in one round, because you're not worried about 5-foot squares when the kaiju's around. It's like has it destroyed this city block yet? So the crisis clock again gives it a sense of scale and things moving, but on that level of like big things happening, the world still turning as your characters are maybe spending quite a lot of time investigating a thing or fighting a thing. But the crisis clock there's a mechanism potentially, like if you do certain things, if enemies become aware of you, so for example the corporate or the rivals or the criminal gang that you're after or whatever, if you do something, you might trigger an extra card on the clock, so they'll advance their plans because they're and brings you closer to the next crisis. I don't think there isn't really anything that lets you take stuff off the crisis clock. It's always turning the screw tighter and tighter, basically.
Right.
And gives play again. It gives just a momentum. You just have to keep going, because stuff's going to happen. And if you mess about too much and spend too long doing certain things, events will overtake you, basically.
Sure. Yeah, it's really interesting because the question of scale, I think, is a natural one for like a Godzilla game, isn't it? Because you like you say, these things are huge. You've got these kaiju, and whether it's Godzilla or Mothra or anybody else, they're enormous, and you want to feel that in the game, but also you're still playing humans, right? Or roughly mostly humans. So there's kind of this disconnect. You're not getting into Zord suits and fighting them, so you need to have that sense of difference in that scale. But also, the game needs to account for like how what's Godzilla, because if it just walks straight through the city, it's gone before your heroes have been able to do anything. So, like that feels like a difficult one to square. I mean, I'm curious about the game, the actual game mechanics and the card system. Like, how did you arrive at cards being the main driver for the mechanics in the first place?
It was almost an instant decision, just because sort of the lead from IDW was, we want to make a very distinct game system for them, that was as identifiable as D20 or other multiple Fate or whatever. So almost instantly, I think most of us just went to, using cards, because not many people do that. There's very, very few games. So that's almost instantly recognizable as different from any of those other systems out there. It's a card deck driven system. And I know Jervis liked there's a lot of things you can do. Dice have lots of advantages in many ways. They're very quick and simple to resolve stuff. You can do rerolls, you can do dice pulls. There's lots and lots of ways. But with cards, you have all the fun of hand play, coordinating cards with other players. Cards have memory, which dice don't. They retain their qualities from place to place, and being able to look at the top of a deck or do all that kind of cool card play stuff. So that was instantly, I think, got his game design antennas twitching, and oh yeah, we can do kind of cool stuff with this. But they're a very weird thing to write a game around in some way, because of the way probabilities work and stuff, which is very non-traditional for a lot of role-playing games. So there was quite a lot of tweaking, a lot of tweaking just to get numbers right. But essentially, it's a target number challenge system. Is the way it works. Is the player narrates what they want their character to do. The DM, the deck master, decides. So you have four aspects. You have mindfulness, which is how well you read people and situations, and the slightly more emotional side of things. You have intelligence, which is obviously your education, cleverness, and then you have coordination, which is your dexterity, physical ability, and strength, so your physical prowess, basically. So the DM will choose which of those aspects the challenge is for. So they'll say, I'm trying to convince the mayor to send, to tell the police chief to send out the cops, kind of thing, or whatever. Okay, that's a mindful challenge. And then a difficulty level of that's going to be a 5+, or however difficult I think it's going to be. And then you have a bunch of attributes essentially from your character sheet. So you have the aspect. So you go, my mindfulness, I've got +4 mindfulness. So that's 4 points already. You have what we call traits, which are character traits. So so that you might say, actually, I've got the persuasive trait. I know it's quite easy. I'm going to use, so you can pick up to 3 traits, and each of those will give you +1 each. You have gear, which I don't know, the big gear that might help you with a mindfulness thing.
Sure.
You might say, I've got my flaky suit +3, whatever. That always helps me. And you have abilities, which again, like gear, they're sort of like between +1 and +5, but they're much more specific. So you could say my ability, your character might have trained negotiator as an ability or something. So you'll pick 1 gear, 1 ability, up to 3 traits and an aspect, and that gets added. That's your basic score. Yeah. You can do a thing called a stunt, which is like if you can come up with a really clever way of doing something, you can either add an extra gear, an extra aspect, or an extra ability. But the problem is there's more risk. So if you fail, you'll end up paying more costs, basically. So you're trying to do something more spectacular, but you're going to risk more doing it. And then usually what will happen is you flip the top chance card. And if it's a red, that gets taken off the score. So anything from 1 to 10 taken off the score. Base cards count 10. If it's black, it gets added to the score. But what you can do if you want to, you've got a hand of 5 cards, your destiny cards. So you can play one of those as well. So if it matches the aspect, so in this case, hearts is mindfulness. So if you play a heart, it automatically counts 10. So again, there's a bit of hand play in there in terms of like trying to match your cards to either your strengths or your weaknesses and things like that. So, and then if your final score beats the target number, then you've succeeded. For most challenges, well, for normal challenges, that's enough. It's like succeed or fail. That's fine. But we also have risky challenges and have degrees of success and failure. So you've a pass or fail, but also for every extra 5 points you fail by, you pay a cost. So not only did you not convince the mayor, but then costs are things like you lose willpower, which essentially is your health points, but also it's a combination of mental health and emotional health and physical health. So you can run out of willpower without ever physically getting hurt, but you're just giving up the fight. I can't go on anymore. You can lose gear or you can discard cards, that kind of stuff. But on the flip side, for every 5 points you go over on a risky challenge, you can choose a reward. So rewards are drawing a card. We have this thing called hero points, which we can get into. You can reduce nemesis points, which is something the DM has. And generally in battle you can do extra willpower damage. So that's the main things. Actually, if you over succeed on an attack, you can do more damage basically. So you're trying to score big and high. So again, something like a kaiju, which has got 20 willpower. Most characters start with 5. So you're trying to do a lot. You're like, okay, let's try and get the score really high and do a lot of damage with this one attack. So that's kind of how the basic mechanism works. With again, there's special abilities and as well special rules that can kind of change the way that works. But the central, that challenge system is the central mechanic.
Sure. Yeah.
I think the question people always ask when I kind of describe the game to them is, so as an action, then I'm just going to use my really cool superpowered armor to punch Godzilla, right? It's like, no. An action is much more than that. An action is much more. Imagine each action as like a panel or two of a superhero comic. So as an action, you're drawing on your gear and your abilities and your traits, and you're kind of going, right, I'm going to activate my jetpack, and I'm going to fly up to Godzilla's face to distract him. I'm going to fly around him a few times, and I'm going to pummel him with the fists, and then does all of this damage in one go. That's the panel. That's a double-page spread. Amazing. I've done a stunt to do that, but of course, if I fail, my jetpack blows up and I plummet to the ground, and somebody has to catch me.
Right, sure. I mean, that's a really nice way of thinking of it. Like even the comic book sort of timing of sequences and events and rounds and stuff like that. And I suppose, like tonally, this is a version of Godzilla that because it's driven by that comic book world, right? So it's maybe a bit more heroic, I guess, would be a way of describing it. Is that right?
Yeah, very much.
Yes. Yeah.
The heroes, they're borderline superheroes, the characters, because they have amazing technology. Some of them are mutants with mutant powers. You can play a robot, and if you've seen Jaguar in the comics, he can grow to the size of a kaiju.
Right.
And that's the thing you can just do because it's a comic book world where crazy powers and abilities exist.
Sure, yeah. So, like in a typical adventure, then, do you think that there is going to be a split between, like, we talked about, like, okay, there's you need to go and convince the mayor of something, help with an evacuation, versus we all want to find a way to like become supersized and get our jetpacks on and fight. Like, is there always going to be a balance, or would you see different adventures skewing towards one or the other sort of type of play?
So I think the one I've just finished for the core book is very much a split. There's a lot of investigation and convincing people and persuading people and kind of trying to get to the bottom of the mystery that drives the story forward. But those scenes are punctuated by fights with super-powered foes and or kaiju. Right. And I think that's really important because you want people to be able to play a scientist or a spy or a thief and actually have really cool stuff to do. you don't just want the soldier class to have all the fun, So you got to give them that balance. And even in a fight, you can draw on team ups, which is such a great thing where you've got a rapport with the scientists in your group, so you get them to kind of analyze the weak spots of the kaiju, so to add even more bonuses to your mighty power punch or whatever it might be. So yeah, I think every class has to have their moment to shine, and the adventures that Gav and I have worked on so far have really kind of played up to that.
Yeah, one of the things worth pointing out as well, something again that we put, it's quite key to the characters. So we talked about the traits and abilities and stuff, which are very mechanical. But the first three things actually you generate with a character are their catalyst, motivation, and temperament. So the catalyst essentially is, how did you get into the kaiju fighting business in the first place? And a lot of it is like my squad was mauled by Godzilla, or my parents were eaten by Godzilla, or this. Not all of it. It's traumatic, but quite a lot of it. But some of it's like I wanted to prove that my theory of kaiju behavior was correct, or that kind of stuff. So that's your catalyst. And then the motivation is something concrete, as a goal basically that you're trying to achieve. So I will, it's like I will show that the kaiju can be defeated with my new drone technology. Might be your motivation, and that's something you can literally achieve and earn hero points for, basically, or work towards. So again, it's not just like, my motivation is to look cool. You go, well, no, it needs to be something. It's like motivation might be, I want my victory to appear on the evening news or something. Yeah, so that can be measured by the DM. And then lastly, you have temperament, which is how you go about things. So that's like, your temperament could be like, leave no one behind, or first in, first out, that kind of stuff. So between those things, you've got a kind of like a view of how your character does stuff. And very deliberately, one of the things we've said is, so hero points, which are like essentially they're bennies that you can spend on things, but they're also experience points that you can spend between games if you haven't used them in game. You can earn hero points for good role playing, basically, and essentially playing to your temperament, playing to your motivation, playing to, or drawing in your catalyst, that kind of stuff. So you're like, oh right, okay, as a scientist, I'm going to stand here and continue to analyze the problem, even though I'm just about to get trodden on or whatever. And they go, oh, that's really cool. Yeah, here, have a hero point for your good role playing type thing. Right. So we've like Mike was saying, it's still kind of the human stories in some ways, and team ups and all that, because comics are about that, because actually the big bad is usually not the story. It's it might be the reason why it's that external obstacle, that external thing, but actually it's the team rivalries or the conniving commander or the something else, which is actually your real obstacle, or it's the enemies we made along the way, or whatever it might be. So, most of the mechanics are actually driven by those character narratives, their traits, their temperament. I think because mechanically most of them are just like worth a +1 or a +5 or whatever. They're all very similar. So actually, those keywords, what they actually mean narratively, is more important. Can you spin that into a cool story about what your characters do? Can you persuade the DM that actually, yes, I can use my intelligence in this situation rather than my coordination. I'm going to think my way out of this trap rather than jump out of it. Do you know what I mean? So you go, using my the power of analysis of my data pad and this, I'm going to so you're encouraged to come up with interesting character-driven solutions to challenges. So again, that's one of the things that keeps it fresh. Of like, it's not all even if you're the soldier, you're not necessarily having to just shoot everything, and that's your answer to everything. You have other abilities, you have other aspects that you can draw on, and it makes that character interplay, which is really what role playing is mostly fun for, kind of the center of what the story is.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm assuming that, for you both and for Jervis, now your favorite Godzilla is probably the IDW comic book series. But prior to this, have you got long histories with Godzilla, as a franchise, as a creature? Are you both fans for a long time, or are you sort of discovering more about it now?
Quite a long time for me. Weirdly, it's almost embarrassing, but my first Godzilla encounter is the Hanna-Barbera cartoon.
Right.
With the amazing theme tune and Godzuki blowing little smoke rings.
Right.
Incredible. Right. And I used to absolutely love that show as a kid. But that was kind of my gateway drug into checking out old black and white Godzilla movies and stuff
Amazing.
like that. I'm actually quite a big fan of the MonsterVerse too, the new stuff, which is I know it's a bit hit and miss, especially when King Kong gets involved. But all things Godzilla. I just love big monsters fighting each other. Come on, I'm quite easy to please.
Yeah, I think my knowledge of Godzilla and stuff has been fairly, I would say, just kind of genre savvy rather than being. I've seen some Godzilla movies and stuff. I've had to research and read a lot more around it from taking on the project. It wasn't, I can't say that, like I say, I remember Godzilla and Godzuki, and I've, I'm saying newer stuff. He's not here, but we can say, this was very poignant for Jervis, because I think you said the first film he went to see at the cinema was Son of Godzilla.
Son of Godzilla.
Wow.
And if he was here, I don't know if you've seen it, he's got the movie poster, because it was the final day of the show, and his mum asked if he could take the poster home, and he's had it for however many years that is.
Amazing.
So for him, it was like a real, it was a real thing. Like, cool, yeah, actually getting to it. He's obviously a big movie fan and all the rest of it anyway. So it was a great opportunity for him to bring a lifelong passion into a game, which probably wasn't expecting to at this stage of his career, I suspect. But so yeah, it was cool. I'm the more modern convert, I think. Mark's kind of in between, and Jervis is like the old school.
Like thinking about that sort of stage of careers. When you mentioned, Gav, that neither you nor Jervis had worked on an RPG before, like what has that transition been like? Like, is it different to develop an RPG to developing a miniatures game?
It is. I think the glib answer is it's easier in some ways, because you're deliberately writing for a group of people who are trying to collaborate and create a story. I mean, to be fair, I have written miniatures games like that as well. But I think we just kind of, mechanically, we approach it in the same way. You still want it to be a solid game loop experience, very playable, the rules to be written in a clear, concise way, all of those lessons we've had from many, many years of writing miniatures war games. And the only thing being is we don't necessarily have to worry about a miniature. So you can do stuff that isn't necessarily tied to the spatial kind of relationships of miniatures on a tabletop. So you can have fun mechanics that are quite abstract and that don't, there's stuff you can't do in miniatures games because they don't make any sense because they're not related to the tabletop experience of miniatures. Whereas role-playing games, because, again, particularly in this, where we've taken this game, because there is a certain physicality to it. There is a map. You have locations which you will share with other characters or a kaiju. There are hexes that and you move around, but it's not a tactical combat game. Like Mark was explaining, a battle isn't one hit, one. Again, miniatures games tend to be very structured in that way. They are tactical combat simulations most of the time to a certain extent, and we've kind of not really got into that for this. This is much more of a narrative experience of like doing the cool thing and very simple abstracting mechanics to resolve that in many ways. But we're just with enough hook that the mechanics kind of reflect the narrative that you've created with your character. So yeah, it's one of those, like 80% of the work is the kind of same, but the 20% difference of like we don't have to make this is a different kind of experience as a playable thing. It's quite freeing. But there's other, there's other limitations. Having to design adventures and kind of making sure there is still enough of that interplay for the character, for the player to get into their character stuff, not abstracting stuff too much, all that kind of stuff. It's things that we've kind of like been adjusting the dial on as we've been going through.
Right.
One thing I found along the way when I first started doing roleplay stuff is that it's slightly easier for old lags like us, because we remember when war games were kind of like role-playing games. Stuff like with Rogue Trader and stuff, and even the precursors like Laser Bird and stuff like that. If you read those sets, they're just like, come on, guys. or even stuff like the original Hero Quest book manual, which is like, these rules aren't complete. Let's be honest. I'm going to make some stuff up here. but we just kind of used to doing that and filling in the blanks without, where I think the modern school of design is actually everything's got to be covered. It's got to be very crunchy. Rule sections are longer. I think the RPG mindset is much closer to the old school wargaming mindset, which is kind of why I find it easy to make the jump personally.
Right.
Yes. And again, it's more toolkit. A role-playing game is much more of a toolkit type approach. Like, here's a bunch of stuff, here's a bunch of rules, and you're equipping DMs in particular. But that was one of the things we decided was like, actually, the person who spends the most time with that book is actually the DM. Yeah, and this needs to be as DM friendly as possible, and the game system itself is as DM friendly as possible. So there's an adventure generator and there's a Kaiju generator, all that kind of stuff. But also just as an approach of like, because the person who buys the book is the guy who runs the game. That's almost the reality again of like 30 years, 40 years of playing role-playing games. That's the way he's like, oh, look, I've got the book. Guess who's going to be running the games? And historically, that's not always been the case. There's always, there's been kind of like this illusion that the players are going to spend quite a lot of time with that book, and there's lots of detail about characters and things, and then they get their own books about their different classes and and the DM kind of gets left out quite a lot. Whereas like, no, we're going to do this the other way around. The DM, we're going to try and we're going to design a game system where there's very little crossover. Actually, the players really concentrate on their characters, and the DM really concentrates on the adventure. And that's the thing. They're not going to have to worry about what all your abilities do, and they're not, because one, there's not that many. The central mechanics cover 95% of situations, and your special rules will just tweak them a bit. And it's up to you to know your own special rules, really. Whereas, again, starting out with some game systems, you need the DM to be like, oh yeah, you've got a thing. Don't forget your thing works with that. We try not to have any of that. The DM is worrying about what's on the adventure, what the Kaiju are doing, and interpreting the players' actions and saying how's that going to be resolved mechanically, and then putting all of that information into the book. So it's all about how to resolve what do the characters want to do. That's mostly what the book answers. Is like how to put things in front of them, and then how do they kind of resolve that from really from the rules section, which like Mark said, is actually fairly short. I mean, it's a chunky rules section, but actually compared to a lot of role-playing games, it's pretty brief because we have lots more discursive elements elsewhere in the book. We try not to clutter the actual rules section itself, which is exactly the same rules in the starter booklet and in the core book. Literally page for page, they'll be the same, so that we can reference them and things. But actually, it's like it keeps those clean. Mechanically, they're very clean, and it just tells you, and then it refers you off to other sections of the book for more discursive, for more in-depth discussion about character creation, about their Kaiju actions, about creating adventures, that kind of stuff. So you don't, again, hopefully as a reference thing during play, it should work quite smoothly as well.
Right. Yeah.
Again, that's one of those war games thing of just like putting together. There's never an ideal way to put together a rule set, because you always have to introduce a concept before you can fully explain it, and then it has an exception, and then another exception to the rule, and then a caveat to the exception. And that's still true, but actually, presenting information in a logical, or at least an intuitive fashion, I suppose, is one of the things Jeff's got very good at over the years.
Well, I did quite like in the quick start booklet that it's kind of like there's a sort of a solo adventure style. Sort of it leads you through the rules and kind of it's like, okay, what would you do here? Oh, you've chosen to do this. Here is how you would affect that in game. Like that's quite a nice way to get someone to learn the rules, I think. Is that in the sort of core book as well?
Yes. It's a separate booklet in the starter set, and it's one of the opening sections in the core book. And again, yes, that was one of the important things of just in principle. I bang on endlessly to anyone who listen about rule books of all types that launch straight into the rules, but they don't actually give you an idea of the shape of the game. You don't know you have no context for what you're reading. So you might mechanically understand it. I roll a dice for this, or do that, but you don't really know what it means. And so extended examples of play. But in this case, we settled on the kind of like choose your own adventure style, slightly solo adventure type thing, which Jervis and I co-wrote. Everything else after you create that context, and people kind of play through a little game and understand it. And then when you're reading the rules in detail later, you understand. Oh right, okay. When I was doing that challenge, I understand that I was actually calling a stunt, and I was doing this, and I was doing, So you've got that overview first, and then the detailed rules later. That was very important. Again, part of that, and again, there's no small number of people coming to this game from the Godzilla side of stuff, not from the role-playing game side of stuff, and this will be their first first time they've ever picked up a role-playing book. So, we were exceptionally aware that they may have no experience at all, or only a vague experience or knowledge of what role-playing games is. So we wanted to put them in the right space. And similarly, we've reproduced the 10-page kind of like introductory comic to the Kaisei era. That's in the core book of like, what is the Kaisei era? So again, people understand what's going on without a 60-page like history section. It's like, no, here's the story so far, and then your adventures pick up from here. Because again, context, role-playing games require that context really. Like, why are my characters doing this? What are they trying to do? And the rules and the background kind of work together in that respect.
I think all the number of the role-playing games I've tried to learn or tried to teach with a group of players or whatever, how useful would it have been to have that little 10-page solo playthrough and just say, your homework, just 1 hour before you turn up, is to just play through this. And then we all know the rules, and we know what we're doing. Get around the table, just start.
Yeah. It's a great shout, actually. Yeah, I hadn't even thought, actually, you could literally get all of your players to do it, because it's only 10 minutes, right, to make your way through it, to understand it. And
the start of the public adventure basically says if you've not played before, this is your first adventure, then get your players to play through the solo thing first, and then come to the adventure.
and again, that's one of the things is like, as a modern role-playing game, one of the things we've incorporated is that idea of session zero and that opening conversation with the players about what you're trying to do and all of that kind of stuff. So that's all, again, we don't assume anyone knows that stuff, even if there's experienced role players. It's like, what is a session zero? Like, how do you go about organizing playing a role-playing game and getting started, and as opposed to just kind of usually launching like, well, everyone creates a character and then you have an adventure and that's it, and you're like, whoop, hang on, I think it seems to be it's underpants known territory of like, one do this, do that, and then adventure. So we try to make sure that all the steps are there and covered and talked about in a way that is very real. I suppose that's the thing. It's like a lot of this comes from our very real experience of playing lots of role-playing games with different people and different systems, and try to answer as many questions before they get asked as we can.
Yeah. Because I suppose there's a lot of received wisdom, isn't there, when you come to the table, and there's a lot of expected knowledge and stuff like that. But if you're designing something for brand new people, like you say, there's a lot of building blocks you need to do. I mean, I guess there's probably
because one of the other things was that some of the DMs noticed is actually we have to undercut some of that received wisdom because it's a different game system in some respects. So some of the DM's advice later on is about, so even if you know role-playing games, this is how to play Godzilla. Now, these are some of the elements of the adventure creation and things that you will not necessarily have come across before. So these are, so when I was writing that DM's advice, it was like trying not to just do it just for beginners of like my first adventure, because actually that's quite covered. There's a procedurally generated adventure system in there that kind of gives you, and then there's advice about how to fine tune it and things. But actually, it's like, what is this and what isn't this? Even if you do know what role-playing games are, or you think you know what role-playing games already are.
Right. Yeah. Because I mean, what sort of differences are then? Like, what would you say are those kind of major differences for the Godzilla RPG versus a D&D or a Wolf-Rup?
I think it's some of the stuff we've covered already. So that sense of scale, that sense of timing, using the crisis clock, again, it's not necessarily unique to this, but using those traits, using that narrative to drive stuff, which is, there's elements of like fate in there and things like that with the way keywords and stuff work, but it's not quite the same thing. So some people might be aware of that, some people might not be aware of that. And so, again, trying to get people into that space of, it's definitely there's a crunchy system there, but it's a narrative first adventure. It's like you're saying what your characters want to do, rather than we didn't want it to devolve down into I'm just going to have 3 traits plus 3. It's like, no, you tell the DM how you're going to resolve it, and you also, when you're paying your costs, you explain to the DM how did you lose your pistol? How did why is your character what is the willpower loss, what's that representing, all that kind of stuff. So you're telling that story, and then the mechanics are kind of there to do the things the mechanics do, but then get out of the way. And so explaining those things to players, like, this is how this game is supposed to be played. And again, then you're removing again a lot of those arguments. It's like, oh no, there's going to be no discourse because we've already answered it. The kind of thing of like, no, we've told you people what we intended the game to be like. So there you go.
Let's focus on interpersonal relationships too, which a lot of RPGs don't have.
Yes.
Which is like, you got to have your kind of building an affinity with other characters and allies, or building a rivalry with them or an enmity with them. You might, things might go bad and you decide you hate another character. How do you play that out? And that kind of stuff. But that's a fundamental part. It's on the character sheet. It's a fundamental part of the rules. And a lot of games don't have it. But I think that kind of building relationship, telling stories together, affects your team up abilities, all that kind of stuff. It has a repercussion in game on so much that you do. So yeah, definitely narrative first.
Yeah, there's other little interesting things like interludes. So again, I wouldn't say it's like radically new for this, but never been used before. But like again, the reality was sometimes because of the scales and things like we need to travel quite a distance. Well, travel was the main thing, or need to spend a night in hospital or whatever, because the rounds are quite long and you do quite a bit, but you don't necessarily have that many of them necessarily. It's quite a compressed action because it is a comic style adventure and things. So we've got the idea of interludes. Like if you need to get on a plane and literally fly to a different city, right? Well, because of the crisis clock, it's like, well, we don't want to spend 6 hours equivalent game time of just like, oh, well, here's another card on the crisis clock, because it just doesn't work. So we have the idea of interludes where you essentially cut away from the action. The players get a couple of special interlude kind of actions, and you add a couple of cards to the crisis clock. So that kind of just gives us, again, it very much focuses on the narrative aspect and the storytelling aspect of it, of like, you can do a quick meanwhile, because it's like, it's not that interesting just to be flying somewhere for 6 hours across the United States, whatever, we're trying to get to Miami. Okay, interlude. Oh, well done, you're now in Miami. And you made friends and you healed up a bit along the way, but also Godzilla's a bit closer towards the city centre. And in the same vein, we also have, I mentioned earlier, nemesis points. So it's all fun for players to get hero points, and as I said, hero points you can spend. We have a thing called downtime, which is like essentially between adventures you have downtime. You do downtime activities, you spend hero points to increase your stats and do cool stuff. But the DM has nemesis points, and that they've got two main roles. The main role is actually, as one, there are costs you can pay. So actually, if you mess up on something, you can, as a cost, you can give the DM a nemesis point. Nemesis points add to the difficulty of all challenges. So just as nemesis points accrue, everything gets harder, including the kaiju and the saves against the kaiju attacks and everything else. So you don't want to be doing it too often. One of the rewards you can get is to take a nemesis point off the DM.
Right.
Yeah. So you've got this varying thing, but actually, again, like the players in downtime, the DM can spend nemesis points to give new abilities to kaiju and things like that. So even if you've got a kaiju coming back several times, like I say, how do you keep it fresh? Well, actually, this time this kaiju now breathes fire because I've changed one of its attacks, or I've added to its abilities, or I've done this thing because I've spent my nemesis points in downtime. So again, the DM is part of the DM is another player. The DM still gets to do cool stuff. They're not just there to do your bookkeeping for you. They get to, so as they're planning the next adventure, they'll be like, oh, actually, I'm going to spend some, I've got 3 nemesis points, I'm going to add this in and I'm going to do this. And actually, yeah, we're just going to, Anguirus is going to come back, but this time he's got lightning bolt eyeballs or whatever, I don't know. So that was, again, explaining how to use nemesis points. And again, there are things that you don't necessarily see in role-playing games.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, they feel like quite nice, like cinematic mechanisms, and like even down to like having that downtime, sort of the ability to do globe trotting adventures, and like you say, go across America and go to different locations, but that's still accounted for within the game's own timeline. The clock is still ticking, the kaiju are still out there doing stuff, and that's nice. I mean, I'm really curious as well, just about like you said, Gav, that you came on and you reached out to Mark and to Jarvis, like getting the band back together sort of vibes of like, because obviously you've all worked at Games Workshop together in the past, so like how has it been working together again as a team, I guess on something completely different?
I mean, it's been great. I mean, for me, obviously I've particularly recently, I did quite a lot of work with Andy Chambers again on Warlord games and Genesis stuff. So again, the chance, Jarvis was there a lot longer with DW and stuff. So, but it's been great because I've not worked with Jarvis for 19 years now. So like I say, I see Mark a lot more often role playing stuff. But again, it was nice to actually, like I say, share a project rather than just like play one.
Yeah, I think we're all known quantities as well. We kind of know each other's strengths, and we can play to that. It's kind of assigning things to do for each other is pretty easy because you're good at that, you can do that. It's that kind of thing. And so I've worked with Jervis more recently than Gav at Games Workshop, I think, as an editorial capacity. And we worked together on a project about a year ago, which is a game we designed, which, thanks to the vagaries of client-based work, is never going to see the light of day.
Oh, wow.
An original Mark Latham and Jervis Johnson dungeon crawl that will never be published. Oh, so sad. Terribly vexing.
I know, proper lost media out there.
Proper lost media, yeah. But yeah, so I've worked with Jervis quite recently, and I've role played with Gav pretty much every fortnight for God knows how long now. So.
Fantastic. That's great. Well, so, I mean, I guess the sort of final questions then are around the actual release of the game. Then, so it's on Kickstarter right now, right? It's already been funded, right?
Yeah.
Yes, it's funded. It's heading towards the $200,000 stretch goal. So it's got upgraded work and components and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, there's about a week left.
Right.
Just over a week left as of recording.
Sure.
But the thing is, it's Kickstarter stuff, but actually, as Mark alluded to earlier, we've literally just finished the first draft of it. Well, in fact, most of the manuscript is like it's done and is going into just copy edit and layout and stuff. There's a couple of bits we'll have to go through, but actually the manuscript's all done. It's almost designed. It just needs laying out and then editorial and stuff. So it's not one of those like, oh, there's going to be problems. Like IDW is a large publishing company. They don't like Ellen, the editor, has been very much on our, it's like, it's due now, right? Okay, when are you going to get the second draft of this in? When are you going to be? So there's none of this. Oh, we just decided to add an extra section in, and it's going to be another 6 months late. It's like, it's part of a big publishing machine, essentially, that we have fed words into, and then that will happen. So I think it's due for release. Or at least, sorry, it's due for delivery October. Maybe it'll be on the thing, but essentially it's going to be, as the Kickstarter finishes, that's going into production and then printed and shipping and stuff like that over the summer, and then it'll be there. And I think as Ellen mentioned, it'll be retail release next year. So there's going to be a gap as well between. It's not going to be like, oh yeah, get your Kickstarter, and then 2 weeks later it's in the stores. It's like there is a Kickstarter exclusive cover, all that kind of stuff. But also there's probably about, I think, a 4 or 5 month lead time at least. I don't know exactly when 2027 is coming out, but there's a get your hands on it now, and then because the retail production run will then kick in at some point, I guess.
Right. Sure. I mean, and I know this is probably a ridiculous question, given that it's, you're literally still working on it and it is in a Kickstarter right now. But like, is there a prospective potential future to are there supplements in mind or ideas floating around or cool stuff you'd like to do if the opportunity arises?
We hope so. Obviously, can't talk too much about that. And the Kickstarter's been a success. It's funded. There's lots of people. So hopefully, IDW have set up a games division just to do this. I don't expect they were just planning to do one game and then close it down again. So the goal is we wanted to create a game that's going to be on shelves for a long time. And the comics and things have got plenty of legs to it. We've written this that it's self-contained. It works. You can create loads of different adventures, and like I say, it's got you can generate your own antagonists and all the rest of it and stuff. So it doesn't require any more supplements. But obviously there's lots more kaiju we could do. There's spin-off comics and stuff like that. But yeah, that's all kind of like relying on the market being there for it, I guess.
Yeah, it's never the lack of ideas. That's the problem, is it? So always the market.
Well, Mark, Gav, thank you both so much for joining me. This has been a great chat. I'm really excited to see more of it because, you've really brought it to life. It sounds really cool, so I think it'll be really fun.
Thank you. Great to chat to you.
Colossal kaiju-sized thanks to Mark and to Gav for taking the time to chat to me about their work on Godzilla. If you would like to find out more, then you can check out the Kickstarter page. I've linked it in the description. The Kickstarter is live until, I think, the 2nd of April, so there should be a little bit of time to get involved if you fancy that. And if you happen to be attending PAX East in Boston this weekend, then you'll be able to have a demo game of Godzilla, the role-playing game, and you can tell us all what you think about it because we're eager to know. Thank you once again to Gav and Mark for talking to me. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.